Welcome to the future of understanding. This is NeuroMind Insights, where we unlock the power of your mind.
Society evaluates mental health from the outside in. We observe behavioral symptoms, sadness, distraction, or an intense need for order, and interpret these actions as extreme variations of normal human moods. Mental disorders represent discrete neurobiological dysfunctions. They are literal mechanical failures that physically disrupt the brain's internal chemical signaling networks. This creates a metacognitive gap. Many patients maintain completely intact self-awareness, sitting inside their own minds and watching their systems fail, without the biological means to stop it. By isolating 12 specific psychiatric syndromes across 4 major neural clusters, we can identify the precise mechanical failure points within these systems. To understand why these behavioral patterns persist, we must move past the surface and examine the underlying neurobiology. We begin with the brain's affect system. This network relies on chemical messengers like serotonin and dopamine to generate motivation, experience pleasure, and facilitate human connection. This chart compares baseline brain chemistry to a depressed state, showing serotonin and dopamine plummeting to near zero. Clinical depression stems from a physical inability to generate these specific neurochemicals, resulting in a profound, heavy emptiness. When these chemicals dry up, the physical output is immediate. Patients experience chronic exhaustion regardless of sleep. Food loses its taste, and cognitive processing slows until simple decisions feel insurmountable. Over time, untreated depression reshapes cognitive pathways. The brain convinces the patient that this numbness is their permanent identity and that joy was always a temporary illusion. Bipolar disorder operates within this same affect system, but manifests as an uncontrollable oscillation. The brain swings between 2 extreme energy poles without prompting or permission. During a manic phase, the brain floods the system with an excess of energy. Thoughts race faster than they can be articulated, the need for sleep vanishes, and extreme confidence drives risky impulsivity that can blur into active paranoia. The manic high eventually collapses into a depressive low. Because the patient has experienced the chemical surplus of mania, the resulting emptiness feels even heavier by contrast. These affective disorders demonstrate that our daily perception of reality and self-worth relies on a fragile chemical balance that exists beyond our conscious control. The next structural failure point lies within the threat detection system. The amygdala is designed to flood the body with stress hormones when the organism faces a lethal emergency. This flowchart demonstrates generalized anxiety disorder, where an everyday event bypasses logic processing and routes directly into a threat response. The alarm system stays in the on position, treating non-lethal variables like text messages as imminent physical disasters. This creates a severe, immediate physical toll. Because the nervous system is constantly preparing for a battle that does not exist, the patient experiences chronic muscle tension, stomach pain, and relentless exhaustion. When the amygdala misfires completely, it results in panic disorder. This is a full-blown survival response, a pounding heart, shortness of breath, and the physical sensation of dying, triggered without any external warning. The secondary pathology of panic disorder is often more restrictive than the attacks themselves. Patients develop agoraphobia because they become terrified of their own unpredictable nervous system, shrinking their world to avoid triggering another misfire. Social anxiety disorder applies this same threat response to human interaction. The brain categorizes social evaluation as a lethal threat, turning basic conversations into high-stakes, terrifying performances. The body reacts with trembling hands and profuse sweating. After the interaction ends, an exhausting cognitive loop forces the patient to endlessly replay and magnify tiny perceived mistakes. Post-traumatic stress disorder occurs when a genuinely terrifying event breaks the brain's memory filing system. Rather than storing the trauma as a completed past event, the brain remains locked in active survival mode. PTSD flashbacks function as vivid, physical re-experiences of the trauma. Triggered by random stimuli like a sound or a smell, they force the patient back into hypervigilance and unpredictable anger as they scan for danger. When the neurological system that evolved to keep us alive loses its off switch, it becomes the mechanism that makes a functional life impossible. In the prefrontal cortex, we find the neural networks responsible for regulating focus, impulse control, and processing neurochemical rewards. ADHD stems from a dopamine deficiency that prevents the brain from effectively choosing what gets attention. While patients can hyper-focus on high-interest tasks for hours, initiating boring tasks remains physically painful. The true torment of ADHD lies in its intact metacognition. The patient knows exactly what they need to do, but they are forced to watch themselves fail to bridge the gap between their intention and the necessary action. Obsessive-compulsive disorder also hijacks executive control. In clinical OCD, horrifying intrusive thoughts invade the mind and refuse to leave. To neutralize these terrifying thoughts, the brain demands desperate, irrational rituals. These compulsions create an endless loop, offering only seconds of relief before the anxiety returns and demands the action be repeated. Eating disorders, including anorexia and bulimia, function as profound, maladaptive control mechanisms that hijack the executive system. Anorexia restricts food intake to assert control when the internal or external world feels chaotic. Bulimia cycles through massive binging, followed by purging to alleviate overwhelming shame and regain a sense of stability. When executive control and standard reward pathways fail, the brain invents irrational, highly destructive loops in a desperate bid to manufacture safety or synthesize dopamine. The most severe psychopathology occurs when the brain fails at neural integration, the ability to filter reality, process logic, and buffer incoming emotional extremes. Borderline personality disorder is characterized by a total lack of this emotional buffer. Minor stimuli, such as an unanswered text message, hit the patient's nervous system with maximum tsunami-level intensity. This lack of regulation creates extreme black and white thinking and a terrifying fear of abandonment. Identity shifts constantly to mirror others, and patients may use impulsivity or physical self-harm to anchor their abstract emotional pain to something concrete. Schizophrenia is a structural fracture in how the brain processes reality, driven by neurotransmitter misfires. This infographic divides the symptoms into two categories: positive symptoms added to reality and negative symptoms subtracted from the baseline. Positive symptoms are active hallucinations and delusions that the brain genuinely perceives as real. Negative symptoms represent subtractions, flattened emotions, lost motivation, and disorganized speech, where forming sentences requires energy the brain simply does not have. Dissociative identity disorder functions as a severe, compartmentalizing survival mechanism triggered by childhood trauma too overwhelming for a single developing consciousness to process. To survive, the psyche fragments into distinct identity states designed to hold specific traumatic memories or emotions. This results in internal chaos, conflicting identities, and sudden periods of missing time. The most complex human functions, our continuous sense of self and our shared reality, are reliant on physical neural networks that can shatter to protect the organism from unbearable pain. Across all 4 neural clusters, these 12 distinct disorders share one unifying trait. They are physiological systems operating entirely outside of the user's control. You cannot simply think your way out of a dopamine deficit. You cannot use logic to force a broken amygdala to stop signaling panic. Intention is powerless against overwhelming physical forces. Asking a patient to simply focus on the positive demands that they override their own failing internal hardware using nothing but willpower. True clinical understanding and the end of societal stigma requires us to finally view mental illness as a structural reality of human biology.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to NeuroMind Insights for more.